Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined tonight by two excellent guests, particularly to talk about American politics because of course it has been a very big day for the United States. Joined first by independent journalist Will McLeod. Will, how are you doing?
Doing quite well today. Thank you.
Excellent. And on the other side of me, we have a political researcher at the University of Edinburgh and a Democrats Abroad activist, Cary. Kat, how are you doing?
I'm doing great today.
Brilliant. Well, we will be spending the whole show today talking about the inauguration of President Joe Biden, but we start just with our coronavirus statistics update. So, as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,508,721 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 1,342,138 were confirmed negative, 166,538 were positive. There were 1,656 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly 92 new reported deaths. Of course, this will be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will show symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get tested. As always, we urge you, if you are showing symptoms, including a new dry persistent cough, a fever, or a change in your sense of taste or smell, please do book a test as soon as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 2,003 people in hospital last night, 156 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 5,468. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures published today show that 93,290 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 1,820 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. This is another record high tally of deaths for the UK, driven mostly by deaths in England. Once all COVID-related deaths are included, including from yesterday's ONS report, more than 110,000 people in the UK have now died with the disease. As at the 17th of January, 7,448 deaths have been registered in Scotland where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate, according to statistics published by National Records of Scotland today. Between the 11th and 17th of January, which was week 2 of the year, 368 deaths were registered which mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, a decrease of 23 deaths from the previous week. 66% of the 368 deaths registered in the last week were of people aged 75 and over, and just 10% were aged under 65. The provisional total of deaths registered over the whole year 2020 was 64,084. This compares to an average of 57,760 over the previous 5 years, meaning there were 6,324 excess deaths across Scotland in 2020. Of the 6,834 deaths involving COVID-19 between March and December, 93% had at least one pre-existing condition. The most common main pre-existing condition was dementia and Alzheimer's, accounting for 28% of all deaths involving COVID-19. And after adjusting for age, people living in the most deprived areas were 2.2 times as likely to die with COVID-19 as those in the least deprived areas. Now, before we do go on to the rest of today's show, if you'd like to join the conversation here, you can do so on Twitter by following us at BroadcastScot and using the hashtag Scotland@7. As you can see, we will be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen throughout the show. But as I've said recently, please do tweet even if you're watching on catch-up. It's always useful to us to know what people are watching, what they're enjoying. So do please let us know what you've got to say about tonight's show whenever you're watching. But today's big news. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. has been sworn in as the 46th President of the United States of America, vowing to unify the country to tackle some of the most serious crises any incoming president has ever faced. Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court, John Roberts, administered the oath outside the US Capitol, just 2 weeks after a mob of outgoing President Donald Trump supporters swarmed the building in an effort to prevent the certification of votes from November's presidential election. Biden, who is famously proud of his Irish heritage, was sworn in on a large heirloom family Bible embossed with a large Celtic cross. He becomes only the second Catholic president in US history, following John F. Kennedy in the 60s. At 78 years old, he is also the oldest person ever to assume the office. His vice president, Kamala Harris, also made history as not only the first woman to hold one of the top two jobs in American politics, but also the first person of South Asian descent and only the second black person, following President Barack Obama in 2008. She was sworn in by Sonia Sotomayor, the first Latina woman ever to serve on the Supreme Court. She used two Bibles, one from the late Thurgood Marshall, the first black Supreme Court justice, and one from Regina Shelton, a close family friend who was something like a surrogate mother for Harris growing up. The inauguration ceremony, which had already been scaled back significantly due to the coronavirus pandemic, was further reduced following the riot at the Capitol 2 weeks ago. Around 25,000 National Guard troops were on duty in Washington to secure the event, creating a stark image on what is usually regarded as a day to celebrate one of the world's oldest surviving democracies. So, Kat, I think we'll come to you first. I think for anybody in the sane side of American politics, this has got to be a good day. But as you said, quite a strange day given the pandemic and the security concerns.
It was definitely not your average inauguration. However, watching it on TV, it didn't seem that different. They did a good job of zooming in and keeping the parts, the songs and the poem, making that a big deal and a centerpiece. And I think that this is Biden really excels at the fireside chat type of speeches. So I think that that's really suited his style. And I thought it was a lovely inauguration ceremony. And I'm glad it went off without any kind of problems.
Yeah, I mean, he's made the kind of idea of bringing the country back together one of his big themes throughout his campaign. And the inauguration ceremony is often a time when America does talk about kind of unifying behind the president, putting the election behind them, and coming back together. Do you feel that he did kind of strike the right notes in his speech in making that happen?
I think he did. I thought he walked a very fine tightrope line very, very well, which was also it was aided by the fact that former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was there. Kevin McCarthy, the ranking House Republican, was also there. The vice president was there, and they all could have gone to both Trump's going away party and the inauguration. They all chose to just attend the inauguration. So that sent a very strong message. And also, I think Biden helped make it clear that this isn't just all water under the bridge, that to move on, we need to have accountability and fairness, and that he was going to be a president for all people, but he expected the same respect out of them as he will give them.
Yeah. Will, how did you feel watching this ceremony today?
Relieved. I felt like a weight had been lifted off of my chest, if I'm describing the emotions. I actually got choked up, which is strange for me. I don't usually get choked up by flags and anthems and that sort of thing. And I kind of realized the emotional weight that Trump's presidency has sort of been bearing down on all of us who would like to live in a country where democratic norms are respected and where the purpose of politics is to simply do the best it can for the people of a country rather than to install some kind of radical ideology, which, Trump's racism certainly fits into. I think the opening of uh, the opening words of Biden's inaugural address sort of set the tone for the rest of his speech. When he said that this was the triumph not of a candidate, but a cause, and that cause was democracy, and that democracy had prevailed. That's when his inaugural address really took off, and that was essentially the theme of it. And he was able to be, strongly opposed to the violence that we've seen recently, while also striking some calming notes in his calls for unity. So I thought he did a very good job. And each one of the speakers that came forward, whether it was the benediction or the poetry, all made those calls for American unity in the face of the violence we saw 2 weeks ago, which I thought was remarkably consistent and very well done.
Well, I did want to mention some of the performers. Amanda Gorman, I think, has kind of been one of the kind of stars of the show. This 22-year-old, the first youth national poet laureate for the United States, the youngest poet ever to speak at an inauguration, only the 6th person ever. What did you make of her and the other people who performed at the inauguration?
I found her incredible. I want to look up a copy of her poem and print it out and stick it on my wall somewhere where I can look at it. The idea that if we decide to be the light, we'll find it, which was the core point of a poem that dealt with, injustice in the face of violence, was an incredibly important sentiment in the time we find ourselves in. And as for the rest of the performances, I did not expect a classical performance from Lady Gaga, but that's what we got. And that got me, that's when I started getting a little choked up, was listening to the national anthem. And the rest of the performance were excellent, I thought.
Yeah. Kat, what did you make of Amanda Gorman and these others, as we said, Lady Gaga, Jennifer Lopez, Garth Brooks, all performing? What did you think about the performances?
I really enjoyed them. I enjoyed that Jennifer Lopez sang some Woody Guthrie in there. That's not always sung at one of these events. I thought Garth Brooks was an especially nice touch since he had sang at, I believe, the Clintons. He's done a few different inaugurations. He might have done the Bushes as well, but that's another nod to bipartisanship. I did enjoy Lady Gaga's. I thought, oh wow, she's doing it with the band and she's doing a more classical version of the Star Spangled Banner. The moment that I got the most choked up was when Kamala Harris was sworn in, because that's just kind of earth shattering. Even though you think, why hasn't there been a woman vice president? There should be already. Just the reality of that moment is amazing. And I did think that, he, as a very faithful, strong Catholic, he had a Southern Baptist minister give the benediction, and I really enjoyed that as well. There's not really many low points that I can think of.
Well, there was, of course, one person not there, kind of notable by his absence, and that was Donald Trump. Traditionally, obviously, the outgoing president and other surviving presidents are all there. So we did see the Clintons, we did see the Bushes, Jimmy Carter, of course, still alive, but not in the best of health, and he had put in his apologies already. But of course, Donald Trump wasn't there. I wonder what you think that does for that sense of national unity going forward. I don't think many people expected Trump to be gracious about this, but he couldn't bring himself to be there at all. How much harm do you think that does?
I don't think it did any harm at all. I think that it was better this way. And as there have been abnormal presidents before, there have been crooked presidents before, there have been all sorts of different things that have made the inauguration just a little bit different. And I think that if this is remembered at all in history, it will be remembered as, yeah, that's the kind of guy he was. He's a sore loser, and he couldn't, do what's best for the greater good, even in this small way. And he didn't turn it into the Donald Trump show. So I'm quite happy that he wasn't there. And I think by merit of the vice president, the Senate Majority Leader, and the ranking House Republican being there, I don't think it mattered that he wasn't there. In the end, he doesn't matter. And that's lovely to say.
Well, what do you think about this? We obviously now have to look back on the Trump legacy, I suppose. And what do you think his legacy will be? What lasting impact do you think he has had on American politics?
Well, I hope that the result of the Trump presidency is that we will be woken to the fragility of democracy. For years, I have been listening to politicians use violent rhetoric in their language and their speeches, and then when we have domestic terrorist incidents, say, "Well, oh, I didn't really mean that. I was just using the language of violence as a rhetorical point. I didn't intend someone to take my words literally, even though I was talking about Second Amendment remedies or don't retreat, reload, or any of these other phrases that we've heard various politicians, almost all of them from the Republican Party, use over time." And I think that this has caused Americans to sit up and take note that we have to treat our democracy seriously, that we can't engage in the charlatan games that some of our politicians have been engaging with, because there are real dramatic and dangerous consequences for that. We've also had a right-wing terrorist threat in this country for a very long time. I remember the Oklahoma City bombing during the Clinton administration when I was a child, and we have not really challenged the violent parts of the militia movement. We haven't challenged white nationalism. We have not challenged these various terror threats that we face. And I think that that final moment of the Trump administration, when there was an attack on the US Capitol, which really did mark the end of Trump's presidency, because he could no longer, after that day, be on Twitter or make public statements that weren't filtered through his advisors, or do any of the other things that he had been doing. I think that ultimate moment will have woken up a lot of these politicians to the realities that they need to deal with. Because in typical Republican Party style, they didn't care about political violence until it threatened them personally. And now that they have seen the results of their actions, I think you're going to see some difference in the Republican Party when it comes to actually dealing with the white nationalist and anti-government terrorist threat that came for them just 2 weeks ago. I also think Kat hit it out of the park with one of her comments, saying that Trump doesn't matter anymore, and that was one of the emotions I have today that is great. From this point on, no one anywhere in the world has to care what Donald Trump has to say. We don't have to care about him anymore. And that's a wonderful place to be.
Well, I wonder how accurate that is. I mean, we've seen, for example, there are a relatively small group, but still, potentially tens of millions of people who are still with Trump, who have now decided that Fox News is too milquetoast liberal for them, and they've moved over to things like One America Network to get their almost completely fictitious news. Trump has reportedly been talking about forming a new party, something like the Patriot Party. How worried are you that something like that happens, and what impact could that have on American politics?
Well, we've had ridiculous people like that before in this country. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but the most recent figure of a similar stripe would have been Lyndon LaRouche, who was he had this very odd ideology that pretended to be far left, and his followers attempted to engage in street fights with various socialist groups in the United States because they wanted to be the preeminent lefty group. What we see with that, with violent movements like that, and what we've seen with previous attempts to cleave off from the Republican Party with the American Independent Party, the Constitutional Party, the Reform Party, is we see that these movements ultimately end in failure. And they end in failure because the structure of American democracy is essentially governed by what's called Duverger's law, which, because of the way that our election systems work, with first past the post, we will tend to have a two-party system in this country just because of the structural needs. Because the side of our politics that splits in two is the side that will lose. So a fragmentation of the Republican Party would hurt the Republican Party in the short term. But ultimately, the Republican Party is the one with the structure, with the know-how when it comes to winning elections, with the history and the experience. So losing some of their loudest, angriest, and most violent members will, if you're Mitch McConnell, be seen as a helpful thing, because you will then be able to go to the American people and say, see, we're not the party of Trump. That's the party of Trump over there, the guys who just broke away. That's not us. So you can just forget about everything that happened over the last 4 years, because that problem has been solved by these people leaving. And then try to treat it as going back to normal. And there are a lot of moderates in this country that would be satisfied with that, because they don't really politically care about anything other than keeping their tax bill low.
Now, Kat, sorry, we've heard Joe Biden talk a great deal about kind of reaching across the aisle. It's something he's been known for throughout his time in the Senate, of being able to work with Republican colleagues. I wonder, what do you make of that as a strategy now, given that obviously there are Republicans in the House and the Senate who are still very much with Trump? There are, people who are openly QAnon believers, for example. What do you think about that idea of reaching across the aisle and kind of trying to create some sort of bipartisan working? Do you think that's the appropriate approach, or should the Democrats be kind of trying to drive that out and kind of say, no, we're in charge now?
I actually can't stand the rhetoric of "we won, you lost, too bad," because I find that to be tyranny of the majority. And sometimes it's tyranny of the minority, right? Because Trump did never win the popular vote. I do think that Biden is very savvy when it comes to foreign policy. That's why he was Barack Obama's vice president. And I was just listening to something about the relationship between McConnell and Biden, and it's not like they're friends. It's not that they're have the same viewpoint or hang out. It's that their methods of working, while McConnell's very transactional, Biden is very diplomatic, going, where are your red lines? Here's my red lines. What can we do to meet in the middle where we'll both be a little bit unhappy, but we'll all be better off for it? So reaching across the aisle is very dependent on your methods of doing it. There's no easy answers, no matter how much we want there to be. And the QAnon, the more radical politicians you hear about, those are in the House, and those will be easier managed in the House because they have separate caucuses. It's more composed like the House of Commons, where there's only two parties, but there's a lot of different caucuses within the parties that are always constantly bickering and fighting just below the surface. So, and also in America, U-turns aren't a thing as much as here. If you are changing with the will of the electorate, you're that's seen as a positive. That's not seen as you need to get out. As much as you need to change politicians every now and again, there's also value placed in people who have dedicated their lives to service the government based on their body of work.
Now, I did want to bring up one other thing before we do move on from Trump completely. Pardons. Now, this is something that the president can do almost at will. He can pardon people for virtually anything, for almost any reason. And he did pardon a number of interesting figures. He pardoned Steve Bannon, for example, who was formerly one of his close advisors, thought to be one of the kind of leading lights of the neo-fascist movement worldwide. What did you make of the pardons that Trump issued in his last few hours in office?
I wasn't surprised. I might be. I was the most I was surprised is by how he didn't go further with the pardons. It this is a difficult thing to explain, but the pardons, for one, are not going away, because you need way too much. There's no will for it politically. And secondly, a lot of times the pardons that you hear about are not the bulk of pardons. Sometimes mandatory minimum sentences leave people in prison for a really long time. To wrap up what I'm saying in a short statement is that the power of the pardon is a necessary check on power on the judiciary and the legislative branch that the executive has, and it needs to stay that way. Did Trump abuse it? No doubt, but I thought it would be worse, and I just, Bannon will. People can still he can only pardon federal crimes. If there's a state crime, the governor would have to pardon the person. So, as unsatisfied, I think presidential pardons at the end of office are always unsatisfying for people.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder what you make of that, Will, because obviously there have been numerous quite egregious pardons in history. Gerald Ford, of course, came into office and immediately pardoned Richard Nixon, who had preceded him. And Bill Clinton famously pardoned Mark Rich, who was a huge donor to the Clinton campaign. Do you think that some of Trump's pardons will cause people to look at it in a slightly different way?
I think that's possible. I agree with Kat that it's a necessary check on the legislature and the judiciary, that it has served an important function over the years. And I was looking through the list of pardons, and he did pardon a number of people for nonviolent drug crimes. I was looking through the pardons, and there were some of them that I agreed with, and people who were able to receive justice who otherwise wouldn't have. And these were people whose pardons had been brought through the normal process where local government officials or senators or congressmen work with the judiciary and suggest this is someone who ought to be pardoned. So there were a number of those. When it comes to someone like Bannon, though, and when it comes to others, there's another check on the pardonability of the president, as Kat started to allude to, which is that if you commit a state crime or a local crime, a federal pardon does not cover the state or the local crime. And the other aspect of a pardon is that a pardon is an admission of guilt. If you accept a pardon, it means that you have admitted you are guilty of this crime. And so there's a legal argument, and I'm not a lawyer, but I've been listening to a lot of the lawyers discuss this and debate this. A legal argument that if you have accepted a pardon, you no longer have Fifth Amendment rights in a federal investigation, which is the right to remain silent, because you can't be charged for everything. So you can't be convicted, so you won't be incriminating yourself, which means that if you've received a pardon from the president, you can't be silent. You have to explain the president's role in whatever your crimes were. The other aspect of it, and I think the reason that he didn't pardon himself and his family, is that due to the fact that the pardon is an admission of guilt, it might have incriminated his family members, because a state court would be able to argue these actions you took are also illegal in this state and took place in this state, and you have confessed to doing them, and we don't believe you should be pardoned for that. So you're going directly to jail now. We're going to have a trial first in which it will be shown that you admitted to this crime. We have your confession, so we're going to take that forward. And it's been reported that that is the main reason he did not pardon himself and his family, because it would have exposed them to even greater legal danger than hoping that the Justice Department doesn't charge them for any crimes that they may have committed while in office.
Well, of course, there are still potentially all manner of investigations into Trump's business affairs, some of his political affairs. There is also, of course, still the possibility of a Senate trial over his second impeachment. But as you said, we can take a wee bit of a deep breath now and move beyond Donald Trump. Now, one of the things I wanted to bring up was Vice President Kamala Harris. She is the first woman to take one of the top two jobs. She is the first person of South Asian descent. Her mother is from India, I believe, and her father from Jamaica. She's of mixed heritage. And one of the things that Joe Biden has tried to do in announcing his cabinet is to try to bring in as wide a diversity of people. One of these things he said is that he wants his cabinet to look like America. So, Kat, I wonder what you make of this. Firstly, Kamala Harris as a woman, as somebody who's non-white, getting into one of these powerful roles, and just the general feeling about Joe Biden's introduction of greater diversity into the top jobs in America.
Well, I think I spoke a little bit about how excited I was to have Kamala Harris be the woman. Is she my ideological preference? No. But do I think that she was the best choice? Yeah, I can admit when I'm wrong. I think that she did a lot better than the person who I agree with the most in ideology would have done. It was more electable at this point. It's all when you have an intersection, such a visual intersection of what you are, a woman, and you're Black, and you're South Asian, it gets very difficult to not look like a bigot when you criticize the person, right? Because you can't make the excuses. So she was a very hard target, if that makes sense. And then as far as his cabinet appointments, I at first I was very hesitant and I wasn't very happy. And I said, wait, I'm gonna wait in my judgment. Because the first couple posts, the big jobs went to guys he knew forever. And then the Secretary of Defense was announced, then the Secretary of the Interior. I cannot emphasize how important it is that Native American was appointed and looks like she's going to be confirmed now that with control of the Senate to the Secretary of the Interior, because that is where all this injustice was done. And one of Biden's things, he might have done it by now. One of his executive orders today he will be signing is to reverse the allowance of the Keystone XL pipeline. And I have a friend that has been out there back in the Obama administration taking pictures and documenting what's been going on there. And it's just really, really happy to hear that. And I listened to some of the Senate confirmation hearing of the incumbent Secretary of Defense, if he gets confirmed. I can't remember his name right now. He needs a waiver because he hasn't been out of service enough. And I heard a Republican senator say the tie goes to the president, and I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and then ask legitimate, substantive questions that weren't theater. And the sheer relief, to go back to what Will was saying, I didn't know relief could feel so good. I didn't know that I had this burden weighing on me so much until I heard a Republican senator ask a legitimate question and act kind to the person that's going up to be Secretary of Defense. So at this point, I mean, I'll probably be criticizing him in a week or two in the picks and the appointments, but I'm really, really happy right now with what he's done. And he hasn't picked people just because they're not white or just because anything. Each and every person he announces, he talks about their expertise and the reasons that he chose them, and each and every one of them has expertise in their field and has a good reason for being there.
Yeah, well, it is, sometimes easy for critics to say, it's just tokenism. But as Kat said, these are highly qualified people, may not be to everybody's ideological tastes. But how important do you think it is for people to see a more diverse range of people in the cabinet and in powerful positions?
For most of my life, every person who was a leader of the country or a great man, and I do mean man, celebrated by the history books, was a white male, someone who looked like me. And I grew up being told that I could be whatever I wanted to be. And I've lived my life being able to make certain choices. But we have a lot of people in this country who think and believe, because of their life circumstances and for whom this is true, that they can't achieve the things they would like to achieve. The reason for having an elected head of state is to prove to the nation that its citizens can lead it and can guide it. For that to be true, rather than just pretty words, for it to be true that any citizen can be whatever they wish to be, it's important that the leadership of the country look like the people who live in the country, and for those people to come from the places that everyone in this country comes from. So it's important for us to have people with different lived experiences than those that I've grown up with in order to have a proper leadership for our country, and also in order to make these promises that we've made with our words true. And that's the importance of having a diverse leadership, because it allows people to say, okay, I'm going to engage with this political process, even though I don't believe it's fair, even though I don't believe it's just, because if someone who looks like me can become the vice president or the president, if someone who looks like me can be part of the top leadership in the nation, then perhaps it's possible for me to overcome these struggles I'm having and change things for my community. So it's incredibly important to have a government that reflects the citizenry. And that's a basic democratic value. So I think that a lot of these choices are incredibly important, regardless of the questions of ideology. And I too have my fair share of disagreements with people who are going to be serving in the Biden administration, and I will be happy to make criticisms when I think they're necessary. But for now, I do think that this is important.
Now, Biden himself, of course, is an old white man. He's 78 years old. But I do think it's notable that he's only the second Catholic president in American history. Now, when John F. Kennedy was elected, that was a major controversy. He had to speak about how he was serving America first, not Rome first. I wonder, do you think there is still that concern in America, or do you think religion has receded enough from political life that that's not something that anybody's worried about anymore?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's something that nobody is worried about. I have lived in rural areas where I've heard people say things about Catholics, and I think it's receding. I don't think it's fully receded yet, and I think that the people who are bigoted on questions of religion are choosing different targets and more vulnerable targets than Catholics right now, such as Muslims or Jews or any other religious minority. They're focused on those places, but that doesn't mean that they have a warm embrace of Catholicism, although I do think it's receded. It's much better than it has been in the past. Certainly when my puritanical ancestors were setting up the colony of Massachusetts Bay, their reaction to Catholics was to try to shoot them on sight whenever they came across people from New France. It was a very violent period, and we have had outbreaks of religious sectarianism from time to time since then. One of the reasons that the state I live in now, Virginia, has the oldest religious freedom law on the books in the American legal system is because there was a low-grade civil war between Protestant sects in this state in the 1600s. And then again, with different waves of immigration, you've had outbreaks of sectarianism. So I think that as the bigotry fades, that doesn't mean that you've created equality. This president is part of how we guarantee that people who come from the Roman Catholic faith know that they are a part of this country.
And Kat, just on the slightly wider point around religion, the US obviously has quite strict laws on the separation of church and state, and yet the president is sworn in on a Bible. There's, so help me God, and the God gets one nation under God, in God we trust. All these things that are kind of baked into the whole political system. I wonder what you make just generally of the position of religion in American politics.
I wouldn't say that religion is as clear a divide in the US as it is in Scotland. The sectarianism isn't just Protestant Catholic. In fact, like Will was saying, Protestants and Catholics are playing nice right now to a certain extent. I, I'm not Catholic. I'm Lutheran, which is very, very strictly separation. It's very non-political. They don't, Lutherans really don't believe in being part of the government. I know Trump took away some of the laws about preaching from the pulpit, or politics from the pulpit, and he's allowed a little bit more in, which I don't like. I'm hoping to see that get rolled back and to be outlawed again, because I don't think that's a good thing for society or any church to be politically allegiant to anyone. I think that he has shown and he has made a very, very clear that he accepts all religions, and not everyone's like that. A lot of the religious talk by presidents and politicians, I think, are window dressing to the truth, instead of actually believing that, you know what I mean? So some of it is political rather than purely religious, most of it, in fact. And also, so you're sworn in on the holy book of your choice. It could be the Bhagavad Gita, it could be the Torah, it could be the Quran. It just depends on what religion you are. So it's not always the Bible. And also, under God is it's optional. But of course, Biden would say under God. Of course, I think Trump even said it
Yeah.
because that's who got him elected, right? It was a horrible
Yeah,
miracle.
yeah,
And
noted Christian
Obama
Trump.
also,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it's very different. But whenever a politician starts talking about religion a lot, I start to listen about what are they trying to sell me. Biden is clearly, I mean, they talk about him going to mass every single day. This is obviously part of his identity, and it's very authentic. And I think a lot of people have different religions than him, respect that he is faithful to his religion and understand that it's not an attack on theirs. And that's the most important thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, we move on now to look forward a little bit to what Joe Biden's agenda might be. Now, he's said that today he will be signing a raft of executive orders. He's planning to immediately rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. He's planning to rejoin the World Health Organization. He's also repealing the travel ban on a number of Muslim countries. And as Kat, you mentioned earlier, he is revoking that permit for the Keystone Pipeline, which has caused so much controversy over the last couple of years. I wonder, when you look at the agenda that he has set out, Kat, what are you most excited about?
I think that I've been mostly pleasantly surprised at how far left Biden is willing to go, because he's always been not so much a centrist as a moderate, where he will change moderately instead of just sticking to the center. I think of Pelosi as a centrist, like she's in the middle of the political part or whatever, where Biden is willing to move. He's not on the far left or the far right of that confidence interval of public opinion, but I do think he's a moderate, and I am just happy that he is listening. And as much as I cringe at how much he courts the Republicans and the moderate votes that of the centrist Republicans, I understand that that's necessary and that it's done in good faith. And I also see that his moves towards the left, he's going further with the environment, he's going further on like welfare, or not welfare is not the right word, with stimulus packages and stuff like that, than I ever thought that he would go.
And well, obviously, with the kind of rise of politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Joe Biden has also promoted Bernie Sanders to head of the budget committee. It does seem like there will be some kind of push to the left from within Congress. But at the same time, Joe Biden got through the primaries as one of the few candidates who wasn't promising any kind of universal health care in the middle of a pandemic. What do you expect to see developing over the next 4 years in policy terms?
Well, when it came to Joe Biden's Medicaid policy or Medicare policy, and Kat, you can correct me if I'm wrong with it. I believe he was one of the people who was on the Medicare for all who want it bandwagon, which isn't true universal health care, but it's anyone who wants or needs health care can get it, whereas anyone else who doesn't want to use the government plan would be getting a private plan. I seem to remember that being his policy during the campaign. But when it comes to his policies, I think America is quite used to having presidents who come in with a clear set of positions that they want to lead on and things that they've believed their entire lives and things that they see as their legacy that they want to accomplish. Reading into Joe Biden's history, he seems to be a different kind of president than we've had in a while. Having come from Congress and been in Congress for so long and having a background coming from a union family, he seems to be more of the representative style of politician. And his opinions have tended to change as the party's opinions change. So his views have tended to be, what is it that my voters and my party put me here to do, because that's my job, getting done what they put me here to do, rather than coming in with my own agenda of what I think is best. And it'll be interesting to see what he's able to get through Congress. But he is someone whose opinions tend to shift based on the opinions of the party historically.
So, Kat, are you expecting to see a rise in the left of the party, particularly, obviously, when it comes to the midterms in a couple of years? Do you think there will be an increase in that more kind of socialist, if I can use that horrible word for in America? Do you think there will be more of that in a couple of years' time?
I think it's too early to tell. First of all, it's because sometimes pleasing everybody ends up pleasing no one. But I do think that Biden seems to have found a secret formula, or he's listening to the right people, or he has the good judgment enough to know where to push and where to ease off. So that will kind of tell. But also, I'm an elder millennial, I suppose you want to call it, where socialism was still a bad word for me. But I don't care if people call me a socialist. I don't care. That's fine. If I'm a democratic socialist, I'm a democratic socialist. It's fine. I don't think Generation Z, I don't think they care. I think that if people call them socialists, they'll be all for it. So I do think that the rise of the left or whatever, there's always going to be, with these two broad church parties, there's always going to be factions fighting one way or the other, and the left is always going to be scrapping. So they're always going to maybe do better in the House than in the Senate. I think we'll have to look at the Senate and see who wins in the midterms. But it's way too soon to tell. I can't make a prediction like that.
Sure. I mean, it is going to be a very interesting thing to watch over the next few years. But before we finish tonight, I did want to look at what Joe Biden means for the rest of the world, and particularly for us here in Scotland. I noted earlier today in the Telegraph, I think it was, somebody suggesting that the fact that one of Joe Biden's ancestors had left Ireland due to the famine in the 1840s meant that he was likely to be inclined well to the UK, which suggests to me that maybe he doesn't understand Irish history very well, or Joe Biden. So, Kat, What kind of relationship do you expect between Joe Biden, the Joe Biden administration, and the UK, specifically with regard to Scotland, if there is to be movement toward independence over the next year or two?
I don't think that he's going to have much of a role, to be honest. I don't think that there's much of a will in America to. America's not very outward looking for the most part. I think Joe Biden probably is one of the strongest allies because he's really good with foreign policy. I think that it's a general American sentiment to want people to get what they vote for. I don't think that the rhetoric around him, oh, his granddad was being starved by the famine. Of course he loves the British. That's just nonsense. It's just utter nonsense. It's just,
Well,
I have an aunt that was born in Ireland or no, she was born in America. The rest of her siblings were born in Ireland. And I learned that you hold your fists like this in defiance to England when you do the Irish dances. Like, that's just, I mean, I think that he will be as supportive as he can, but manage your expectations because America has a lot to deal with. And really, they're going to be dealing with autocratic nations more than democratic ones.
yeah, obviously, we do not recommend that you read the Telegraph. It's as we've just described, somewhat fictional. But we move on to Will. And Will, we've talked a wee bit today. We've mentioned a few times that Joe Biden has this extensive foreign policy experience. It's one of the reasons that he was picked as Obama's vice president. So what do you think Joe Biden's focus will be over the next few years for America's place on the world stage, given that so much of American politics over the last few years has been about putting America first, and that there are so many problems at home to deal with? What do you think America's role on the world stage is going to be during a Joe Biden presidency?
Well, if I could say, Donald Trump didn't put America first. He insulted our allies. He eroded the institutions that we use to work with other nations because we recognize that we're a country of 300 million people, and there are other countries of 1.3 and 1.5 billion people out there, that we are stronger if we have a group of friends we can work with to try to create a world without conflict and war. And we haven't been doing a very good job of that recently. I think one of the first things you're going to see, which is going to horrify most people, is honesty when it comes to what our foreign policy has been under Trump. One of the biggest criticisms of Barack Obama was the drone war. But what he did with the drone war was let everyone know it was happening and make it available to public scrutiny. Donald Trump went back to having secrecy when it came to U.S. airstrikes and U.S. military involvement overseas. So we are likely about to discover a lot of what has been going on under Donald Trump that hasn't been talked about. There was, of course, the strike attacking one of Iran's leaders, military leaders recently, and I'm not sure what we're going to see when it comes to more of that. But Donald Trump has created a tremendous mess. And I'm very glad that I don't have a job trying to clean that up, because it's going to be exceptionally difficult. And it's going to take more than one presidential term or even two presidential terms. We are going to be living with the consequences of the mess Donald Trump created for a long time. And unfortunately, it's going to require multiple nations to work together to fix it. It's not something we can just sweep away with a few executive orders. So I expect him to be taking a diplomatic tack and trying to work with other nations to restore cooperation on climate, and to try to start addressing the refugee crisis again, and to work on so many areas where we have dropped the ball. One of which being that America, through the CDC, was a big piece of global pandemic planning. And Trump's shutdown of the American monitoring stuff didn't just kill 400,000 Americans, it hurt the world's capacity to respond because we had been supporting a lot of the infrastructure there. So there's just so many places where there are fires to put out caused by the Trump administration. And I feel very pessimistic when I think about all that needs to be done and how much time we've got to do it, and especially when it comes to climate change. But my hope is that with his ability to get bipartisanship, in Congress, that perhaps we'll see a return to the idea that politics stop at the border, and we'll be able to work with Republicans on treaties and agreements that we will need Congress to sign off on. That is my hope.
Well, then, just
we'll have to see.
Sorry. Well, go on.
I just said, but we'll have to see. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just very quickly then, before we do wrap up, Will, do you think you will serve a second term?
Based on my predictions that I made back in 2016, I'm sort of wary of making them, but I think he might retire. He is older. He has a family that he wants to be close to. I think he might choose not to run again, but I can't say for sure.
Sure. And Kat, what's your suspicion? In 4 years, will we be looking at Kamala Harris as the presidential nominee?
Perhaps it could be her. I don't think Joe Biden will run for another term. I think that the stars really aligned because he is, as Obama called him, a gaffe machine. He isn't great on his feet. So the shape of this campaign was really suited towards him. And Thomas Jefferson was not a good public speaker. So it just goes to show that there's different strengths we all have. But I don't. I think that he will. The judgment he's shown makes me think that he will retire with dignity.
Well, it is going to be a very interesting few years, and I do hope that over those 4 years, Kat and Will, you will both come back and join us to talk about it. But thank you both. God bless both of you, and God bless America. And thank you to you at home for joining us as well. This has, for me, been a very interesting discussion. I hope it's been interesting for you too. If you would like to see more of this, then please do support Broadcasting Scotland. If you can afford it, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your donations help us to keep doing what we do. As many of you will know, we're also running a crowdfunder just now to try and employ some staff, including a full-time editor and some full-time journalists. So if you're able to support that, you can do so by going to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate. If you're not able to support us financially, don't worry, the shows will always be free to view online and you will always be a valued part of our audience. But you can still make a big difference for us by following us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, by liking our Facebook page, by subscribing to our YouTube channel, by making us a favorite on the Amazon Fire Stick, and then sharing these shows around with your friends and family. Word of mouth is by far the best way for us to spread the word about what we do. So you can make a big, big difference for us by helping that way. And finally, if you'd like to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, we are always looking for new volunteers in front of and behind the camera. Wherever you are in Scotland, there are things you can do even if you're not able to get into the studio here in Glasgow. So if you'd like to get involved here and help us build a better broadcaster for Scotland, you can do so just by contacting us through the website. But that is all we have time for tonight. Gordon will be back again tomorrow. I will be back again sometime in the next few weeks. I'm taking a wee break as of tonight. Oh, sorry, that's a lie. I will be back on Sunday before I take the rest of my break. But until then, thank you very much once again to Kat Cary and to Will McLeod. Thank you again for joining us and have a great night. Good night.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
how quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.